What is up guys, this is Wim for the Melodic Techno Academy, and in this video you will learn how to make a melodic techno track like Mathame. Let's get into the analysis. First of all, we see a very strong anti-groove in the drum sounds and the synthesizer sounds. What this exactly means I will explain later in the video, but it's a very common technique that, for example, producers like Tale of Us, Mind Against and especially Mathame are using. The drum sounds of Mathame have a very rich and dirty sound, and they sometimes even sound a little bit raw and unprocessed, but it's giving us this really nice and full analog feeling. On top of that, they use those big and beautiful string sounds and also of course the very famous chord sounds of Mathame, which create a really nice emotional feeling, especially in the breaks. And to make their tracks even more emotional, they add very often vocals into their tracks, and sometimes they have this pitched up vibe, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do this later too. But let's have a look on the arrangement of Mathame. We very often see that the track is starting actually with the intro, so it's a very unique arrangement that we see, and it's very useful to surprise the listener. And on top of that, that arrangement technique is very beneficial for Spotify and others, because first of all, the listener doesn't have to listen to a 1-minute intro first before the track is actually starting. And also, of course, we all know that Spotify and others are promoting shorter tracks more because they work better in the playlist. So if you wanna get some more recognition on your tracks, it's also a very good idea to shorten your tracks up a bit, or maybe even create a radio mix, which is just like 3-4 minutes. And Mathame is exactly using this technique to create more successful tracks on the streaming platforms. And guys, this template is of course available in the description for all my Patreons again. And this video is the result again of a huge donation of Lemine. Thank you again for supporting me on Patreon and all the other supporters out there. But let's jump into Ableton. So we are starting out with a rather minimal and short kick here, which is important because we want to leave some room for the bass and for the tom sounds that are coming in here. So after that, I've chosen 2 different tom sounds here. And you can see they are sounding quite similar, they only have a little bit of a different pitch to them, and that is sometimes really beneficial to create a tom groove, which is really sounding like it's coming out of one drum machine. So you can see I used those tom grooves here, applied a little bit of velocity, and we are already starting to add a little bit of groove here, because this one is not perfectly hitting here, but we are offsetting it here and there to start to create this very pronounced Mathame groove. So very minimal toms here, they don't have too much low end, and they're also not mixed in too loud, because the sub bass here will be quite loud in the track and taking over the sub frequencies. And the sub bass here is actually very simple. As you can see, we just have a minimal sidechain here applied, and I just took a random bass patch here, and you can really do this with pretty much all of the bass patches in here. Most of them will have a little bit more envelope applied. And also usually they will have a little bit of a longer decay time here. And sound something like this or so. And when you want to create the super low rumble sounds that we see in a lot of Mathame's tracks here, it's very easy to do that. You just take a random bass patch and really turn down the envelope, for example here, or you could also turn down the cutoff filter a little bit. And then you also want to shorten the decay up quite a bit. Now we get this super plucky sound, which is just really playing in the lower frequencies here, and that's a very easy technique to achieve that. The only thing that is important here is that we are adding quite some velocity here on the cutoff filter and also a little bit on the volume level, and then we can just use this and go in here and also play around a little bit with the velocity. We can already create a little bit more groove by doing this. So let's go on with the drum sounds. First of all, I have this hi-hat sound which I created in Diva. And now we are really starting to apply this anti-groove that I was talking about. You can really see here that those are quite far away from the original position here. And also the velocity changes are getting quite drastic. And this is very important, especially on the hi-hat sounds. You can hear it in Mathame's track, really pronounce this groove here. And this is why I call it an anti-groove, because it's not like a normal groove where you maybe apply just a little bit of a change. Mathame is making it really obvious and making the track sounds way more humanized and analog analogish, and this is how they really stand out from other productions. And the hi-hat sound here is the first step of achieving that. I just want to play this one time with the kick and bass when we actually go back and quantize this again. And it's a quite subtle change if you just listen to it with the bass, but I hope you could hear it already. This is already adding this anti-groove that I was talking about, and when we start to add this on multiple elements, like the open hi-hat or like the synthesizer sounds later on, it gets very obvious in the track and creates this nice humanized movement. So this hi-hat sound again was created in UE Diva, and it's actually a very simple patch, but I really like to use this as my hi-hat. We just have a very simple noise here applied in the dual VCO, and we have a high pass filter, which is already quite important here. So we are cutting away a little bit of that mud, and we are also doing this by boosting the resonance on the very top of the filter here. So that was just fitting way better in the track. And of course we can go in now and automate this throughout the track. Mathame is also using this, and it's a very common trick in the melodic techno scene to automate your hi-hat sounds and really get a more progressive and interesting feeling here. So let's just record a little section of that. So you can see a very simple automation here, but it's already giving us this nice humanized movement. And of course, later on when we introduce the synth, we can go back in here and fine tweak it a little bit. And then we have this open hi-hat sound, which as you can see is actually unprocessed. There's nothing going on, but the choice of sample here is very important. And I've chosen a very gritty and full sounding hi-hat here, and it actually sounds more like a noise sample, so this one is harmonizing really nicely with our closed hi-hat sound here. So just for demonstration purpose, let's just try to use another hi-hat sound, which sounds more like a classical hi-hat, and let's just see what happens if we replace it with this noisy hi-hat here. You can see that this is not really working together and it sounds absolutely horrible. And this noisy hi-hat sounds way better in the mix here, and this is actually also a very important aspect of the mixing process. It is not always applying the right effects. As you can see, we don't have any processing here at all. Most of the time it really comes to the point of choosing the right samples and of course also the right synthesizer sounds. And also, I talked about it already in the intro, we want to have this gritty kind of unprocessed feeling in the drums. And let's just take this equalizer and something you would normally do, for example, in the last tutorial like Marino Canal. We wanted to have a little bit more of a clean sound in the track where we apply some reverb and just have the high frequencies of the hi-hats. But in Mathame's tracks, it's usually completely different. We want to have this gritty, also low frequencies, even in the hi-hats here, where you would usually think it's only playing in the high frequencies, but in most samples you would also find some grit here. And in most tracks, I want to cut this away. But this time it's actually different, and I want to show you the difference it's making here. So maybe usually you would go something like this. But you can see there's quite a lot of low frequencies here actually, and especially in the track here. We're completely losing this rich and full sound if we are applying this high pass filter here. So let's just get rid of that and continue with our next sound. So I took a couple samples here and really tried to recreate a very big and full sounding clap here. As you can see, we are also starting to add some groove to our sounds here by just putting them a little bit before the kick is hitting here, and sometimes has a really nice effect. Usually you want to be quite gentle with this and really just take it a little notch here in front. But as I said again with Mathame's track, we could go a little bit more crazy with this and really make this groove a little bit more obvious. So let's play this together in the track. And I actually made them into mono. So sometimes when you're using a lot of different samples, they have some reverb applied and maybe some other stuff. And to make them really sound like they're coming out of one room, it's just really nice sometimes to take some stereo width away. And then afterwards I actually added my own reverb, and with that technique they are just really sounding more like they're coming out of one room. So let's have a look at the effect of this. And also the relatively long decay time here is very important in creating this nice tail, because the other drum sounds we are leaving quite plain. We're not adding any reverb here. You can see all the send effects are turned down, and this is what I mean when we want to have this raw and unprocessed feeling. But with the clap sound, you can make some samples definitely stand out by adding a little bit of reverb here on top. And to drive the track even a little bit more forward, we can use a very big ride sound here. This one is already wet and has quite a lot of reverb applied, which I would always do on the ride sounds, because that way they're just melting together. And this time we're actually also cutting a little bit away of the low end, because this one is just a background element. And then of course we also have quite a lot of group processing here applied, and this is also very important. So I'm gonna show you this together here with all the elements. We have again the compressor from Arturia here, which is doing some really nice work. This time we're turning the compression here up quite a bit. And after that we are adding this distortion plugin here again, which I really like to use, with a lot of crunch here turned up and also the strength. And it's just adding some really nice distortion on the high end. So let's see what those two effects are doing together. So they are really nicely gluing our group here together and creating some more progressive feelings in our track. But let's go on with the synth sounds. So I wanted to create a very similar groove plug like we're hearing, for example, in the track Skywalking or some other Mathame tracks. And it's very useful to play this in the background. We just have one note here applied, but as you can see, we are also adding quite a strong groove here. This one is offsetted quite a bit, and also of course the velocity changes here are quite drastic here. Also quite a strong groove applied. And this groove element here sounds like this. And now you can see it's very nicely melting together with our bass line here, and those groove plugs here especially are very useful to create almost like a second layer of your bass line, and this can play pretty much through the whole track, and it can really nicely fill up our track here, especially in the intro and some other parts. And this is just a very basic patch here that I took. The most important thing here is really that you play around with the envelopes, because I started out with a very basic Plucks sound, which probably had the envelopes here all the way down, and I think it also just had a saw wave here, for example, applied, and it was sounding something like this more. So guys, I have to say it again, it is just so important that you not just take a random preset and start with your track. You really have to go in here and fine tweak the envelopes, the oscillators and everything. And I just want to show you this one more time, how simple changes can make really the difference between a beginner and a professional track. So let's listen to this one more time and tweak the envelopes and some other stuff here. So with this triangle wave here, we're pushing it way more in the back, and that's exactly what we want. We don't want to have it too prominent in the track. So that way you just don't have to apply so much processing, and you can already get your sound here perfectly fitting. But of course, we also wanted to really fit it in the track, so we also applied a little bit of processing here. This erosion effect is sometimes really nice to add a little bit more grit to your sound, and I'm just going to turn this up to show you what this is doing. So adding this lower noise here, but we have it mixed in quite low, so you won't really even hear it that much, but it can sometimes really help to give this more analog feeling. Then we actually turn the sound into mono again, because we actually use some stereo delay and plate reverbs here, and sometimes it's a nice check to just check which sounds better, and we're also leaving some more room in the stereo field for the other elements that are coming in later. Then I have the same distortion plugin here again, added pretty much the same preset, and just adding a little bit higher distortion here, nothing too crazy. But then, as I said again, we just want to have this slightly playing in the background. So we're cutting away all of the high frequencies here again. I mean, there's not much going on here actually, but sometimes it's still useful to just get rid of that and really push those groove plugs far out in the background here. So not much happening, and then we just have a slight sidechain going on here. So then I actually duplicated this groove plug here and created a second plug sound. And this one I wanted to create more like a plug sound that we also hear in the track Forever. So as I said, I just duplicated this patch and I didn't change much. I really just applied some noise here and I also switched this one on. And then most important, we actually changed the envelopes here. And that's exactly what I wanted to show you. We have this groove plug here which sounds completely different than this plug sound, and we just achieved this by some minimal tweaks here in the parameters. So let's compare those two sounds again. You can see pretty much the same preset here actually, but they sound completely different. And of course, again, I took some time here while producing. I really set those envelopes at the perfect stage here, and also maybe put a little bit more envelope here because we want to have this noise a little bit more prominent. And that way with those two plugs, we're already creating a very nice groove in our track here. So that was already a good starter for our track here, and then we could already add some more chord sounds. And I just created this big string sound here. I actually played around with this new plugin from Mathame, ended up using this preset here, and it just sounds really nice because in Mathame's track we also see this big strings. This time we're using it more as a background element because the main chord element is actually those big and famous chords that I'm gonna show you afterwards. So those string sounds again worked really nice to create some emotional content in your track, and this time we just want to introduce it here to support the chord sounds, which actually sound like this. So of course we couldn't nail 100% the Mathame sound, but they might be using a specific synthesizer, so I would never really bother too much with really recreating those sounds 100%. We can just try to get close to it and then just create our own sounds from this. But what is very important here in the chords, that we took the same chords here from the strings, but again we are starting to add this groove here. And that is just a very simple technique that many producers in different genres are already doing. So we're just usually taking the upper notes here and just offsetting them very slightly here. And we're doing this pretty much on every single chord hit. And I just want to show you this, how it sounds actually when we take all of those notes and quantize them again. So it sounds like a classical chord sound, but this slight offset here is really taking it to the next level. So let's go in here into the preset. So what is actually happening, that we are just having one main oscillator here, of course, as a saw wave mixed all the way up. And then we are just adding this triangular wave here at 1 octave lower, but it's just very subtly in the mix. So the most important thing is that we are using the Moog oscillators here and also the Moog filters and the Moog envelopes, which are creating this really nice sound here. We just mixed in a very slight noise, but it's also not too noticeable. Let's have a look at the processing here. There's also not too much happening. The main effect that we are using here is a chorus from Arturia, and we just have this mixed in at 38%. So let's turn this off again. This sound is a mono from the Diva. It sounds amazing, but I wanted to add a little bit of stereo width to the sound, because you can see in the background elements that we introduced before, we made them almost mono, and also in the drums we don't have too much stereo width going on, so the main elements can really stand out now if we add a little bit of stereo width here, and it works really nice with this analog sounding chorus here. This time we also didn't need any of the low frequencies in here, because the diva is usually producing quite a bunch of low frequencies, and we just introduced a very slight sidechain here. On those Mathame, Mind Against and Tale of Us style tracks, you don't want to have the sidechain usually too obvious, only if you really make it more of a stylistic element, for example on some pad sounds, but usually you just want to use it as a mixing element, and that means that you can't actually really hear it in the track, but it just helps to create a little bit more space for the kick here. And yeah, of course, now we can just go into the chords here and also record a little automation, because otherwise the chords might get quite boring. And what is quite important when we turn the cutoff filter here up is actually that I also left a little bit of sustain up here. Otherwise we would just have a very short chord sound. It's not so noticeable when we have the cutoff filter down here, but when we turn it up, we have a little bit of an extended chord sound, which fills up our track very nicely. So you can see here, it's not noticeable, but when we turn it up, and you might hear this very slight detune moving effect, and this is coming from the vibrato here, just very slightly applied, but it's very nice to create this detune feeling in your sounds, and especially on this chord sound it worked great. And as I said in the intro, Mathame is using really a lot of vocals in their tracks, and it's really creating this emotional touch. So I just found this vocal loop here and just applied a little bit of processing. We used the Nectar 3 here, more as a pitch correction device here. So I just applied the key here, E minor, and it's just doing some very slight pitch correction. And I put it into mono because I think it had quite a lot of reverb on top, and I didn't want it to get too spacey, but actually afterwards I added my own reverb here, where I used the Valhalla Vintage Verb for this big core reverb here. So I actually took this vocal loop here and duplicated it, and this time I wanted to recreate this kind of pitched up vibe that we see in some of the Mathame tracks. They sometimes applied on some female vocals, and I used again the same settings here in the Nectar as a pitch correction, but then you have this format function here. So let's see what this is doing. I'm gonna turn it off first. So really nicely pitching this up here, and then again we have the same processing. Also very important here, the equalizer. So we just want to have this very airy vocal, and it's creating this very nice vibe here in our track. So without that one, this sounds like a normal vocal and is also quite dark in the track, but again, if we add this top layer together here, it sounds way more interesting. So guys, this is already it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and of course I would highly appreciate it if you support the channel by leaving a like and maybe even a comment down below. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.